When Everquest was released back in 1999, it wasn't the first massively multiplayer online role-playing game, but it was the best. It remained the best for a long time, and it's largely the game responsible for making this genre so kind of widely popular and so well played. So many people just get addicted to this style of gaming because it really just tasks you with getting stronger and stronger and exploring some big and detailed and colorful world and killing lots of crazy creatures and stuff like that. So Everquest 2 is finally here. The game spent a long time in the making and obviously has some very big shoes to fill, and it almost fills them. It's got some pretty impressive characteristics to it, and it really makes good on a lot of the issues that affected Everquest during the course of its long life. Of course, the original Everquest is still widely played to this day. And Everquest 2 also carries many of the refinements that the genre has picked up over the years. It's got all the little things that have gradually improved the online role-playing experience and making it more accessible and basically more fun and more instantly gratifying. With that said, Everquest 2 is a lot like other similar games of this nature, so the answer to the question of whether or not you should play this game is going to be very personal, because it depends really on whether you still like games like this or whether you've ever liked them. You have to really decide whether kind of the marginal improvements here are worth abandoning your game of choice, or whether they're worth going back to if you've already kind of played out games like this. After all, Everquest 2 still is basically sort of the grind that is notorious of this genre. You end up spending a lot of time either killing stuff, either alone or in groups, or grouping with other players. And the combat is pretty fun, but it's also kind of hectic and repetitive and so forth, and the game can easily soak up hours and hours of your time. So it's really kind of a big time sink, but it sports some really impressive graphics, as well as some great audio. It features full speech for many of its non-player characters. So it's a pretty good foundation for Everquest to continue what it's been doing for all these years, though it's also not sort of the revelation that some fans of this genre have been hoping for. If you've already made up your mind about massively multiplayer online role-playing games, this game probably isn't going to change your mind. Of course, there's a whole lot of detail to Everquest 2, and you'll get a better sense of that detail if you read the full review. However, you should know a few basic things. One is that it doesn't have any player versus player component, so that sort of raises the question of what's the ultimate incentive for, raising your levels and getting stronger and stronger. Sure, there's always the implicit sense that you're kind of showing off to the players around you. You want to kind of race to the finish line faster than they can. But there's also this big guild system in the game. It's more elaborate than what you get in some other games, because here, if you form a guild with other players, that guild can gain experience levels of its own and gradually gain status within your starting city. So you can sort of become more famous in the game world as you complete tasks for your guild, and that's pretty cool. The other thing is that Everquest 2, even though it looks pretty impressive, also requires a pretty darn fast system in order to run well. On a slower system, you could get it running decently, but that's going to come at the expense of a lot of the graphical bells and whistles. Even on a fast system, though, you're probably going to get some pretty bad frame rates in the game's starting cities, and this is really pretty unfortunate and exacerbated by the fact that there are some pretty long loading times in between the adventure zones. So early on, when you're going on all these quests in the cities and stuff like that, it's pretty engaging on the one hand because there's just so much to do and so many characters to meet, but on the other hand, you're often interrupted by these pauses and things like that, so it's a bit of an unsettling experience at first. One of the most appealing things about Everquest 2 is that you have so many different character races and character classes to choose from. It's not an overwhelming number. The character races are pretty obvious, whether you want to play a dwarf or like an ogre or an elf or whatever. It's got all that stuff. And starting out, you only have to choose from one of 4 different career paths, which is the fighter, the mage, the priest, and the scout. These then branch off into different directions. So if you're a fighter, you can then become a warrior or a brawler or a crusader, and then in turn, one of those at level 20 can branch off in a couple of different directions as well. So the game sort of steers you on this career path the higher and higher level you get. This is a lot of variety, and the classes each seem pretty powerful, have a variety of different attack skills, and are each seem pretty viable and interesting. So there's a lot to do in combat, but at the same time, as mentioned, the combat can start to get pretty repetitive after a while, just by virtue of how you'll repeatedly fight the same stuff over and over and slowly kind of rise up in the ranks and gain levels, hopefully find some cool stuff along the way. From playing Everquest 2, you could tell that a lot of people who know a lot about online role-playing games and probably have spent a long time playing these games had a thing to say about the design. It is quite streamlined. It does incorporate many of the good ideas that have been introduced in other similar games, but at the same time, it's not this big quantum leap, so it's like if you're already happily playing a game of this type, it doesn't necessarily have what it takes to pull you away and get you into this world instead of that one. But it's also a pretty impressive game in its own right. It's pretty addictive, has a good fast feel to it, less downtimes than what EverQuest is notorious for. So it's worth checking out if you've got an open mind and want to experience a big old new version of Norath for yourself.